Hi, welcome to the latest in the series of videos on Irish ancestors. This one is a little different. St. Patrick's Day, or Paddy's Day as we call it here in Ireland, is coming up shortly. And I thought I'd zero in on something that is a bit of an antidote to the kind of paddywhackery and green beer and green rivers that are associated with St. Patrick's Day. In particular, to zero in on what's at the root of an awful lot of Irish America, some of the pain that's at the root of Irish America, and to do it by tracking a single family moving from Ireland through Liverpool on to the US, onto New York, and their experiences. And again, this is a family that I came across in the course of doing genealogical research, so there is a connection with genealogy here. Okay, let me just go to my slides. Here we are. One family. The family are the Sullivans. There's a John Sullivan and his wife, Joanna Sullivan. Her maiden name was Sullivan. Both of their fathers' names are Sullivan. Both of their mothers' names are Sullivan. This is a part of South Kerry, just outside the town of Kenmare. It's the townland of Claddanure. This is where they lived. This is a Google Street View picture of the area now, and it looks completely barren and bare. At the time I'm talking about, which would be the 1840s, the 1830s, 1840s, this would have been crawling with people. There would have been small holdings all over it. Maybe not at the very barren top of the hill here, but all the way down. Every half acre would have been growing potatoes, would have been supporting a family. And this is where they were. Okay. In pre-famine Ireland, there weren't a great deal of luxuries, to put it mildly. There had been a huge increase in population. I'm not going to go into the details of it, but the size of the population had quadrupled over 3 generations. And the one thing that was saving people from starvation was the potato. The potato is an extremely nutritious vegetable. A couple of kilos of potato a day with a bit of buttermilk and the odd herring thrown in was everything that you need to be strapping, strong and healthy. And one of the things that a lot of the continental visitors to Ireland used to remark on was how destitute the people were and how healthy they were. And it was a credit to the potato. So, and they were utterly dependent on the potato, as I said. This family, John and Joanna, married sometime before 1840. There's no record of the marriage that I can find. And here are their children from the baptismal records of Templenoe parish, which is the parish that contains, it's just outside Kenmare, as I said. There's the baptism of Margaret, so Bap Margaritam Phil Leg Johannes Sullivan et Joanna Sullivan de Claddanure. So there you are. There's Margaret of John and Joanna Sullivan of Claddanure. There's William in 1842. There's a Michael that I know is there for reasons for the family coming to me for research, but I could find no record of a baptism. Again, that's pretty typical of genealogical research. There's always one missing somewhere. And then John in 1845. December 1845 was the beginning of the famine. There were patchy failures of potato crops. People had stores, people had neighbors, people had family. It was, unpleasant, but not disastrous. The next year it happened again. And at this stage it was getting very serious. There was still food available here and there. There were bits of corn. There were bits of work available. 1847 is when it really hit badly. Black 1847. This, what you're looking at here, is a picture of the famine monument on the quays in Dublin, a monument to all the people who had to migrate. And as you can see, it's pretty harrowing. In 1847, the Quakers are one of the few groups of people who come out of this very, very well, that the whole famine. One thing, by the way, I'm calling it the famine. I'm aware in North America it's called the potato famine. That to Irish ears, that sounds just a little bit insulting. It's like as opposed to the turnip famine or the onion famine. No, it was the Great Famine in Ireland, or just the famine. This is an account of their visit to this area of South Kerry, where the Sullivans were living, the Sullivan family. The appearance of the cabins from Sneem to Kenmare was very poor. At some we stopped. The inmates had not tasted food for a length of time, for many disease has added its ravages to famine, so that we deemed it incumbent for the urgency of the cases to procure some immediate relief for them. At a small village, we had hoped to procure some bread, but were unable to do so, and it was pitiable to see the expression of the poor children with whom we divided one loaf of bread, which was all we could purchase. Our usual supply of bread had been long since exhausted. The district from Sneem to Kenmare is really destitute, many squatters dispersed both on the roadside and the lower parts of the mountain. So this is the precise area where the Sullivans were. At this point, it seems, I'm not 100% sure, that they weren't destitute yet. They had managed to hang on even through 1847. This is a map from the 1840s, the Ordnance Survey of the area. You can see Kenmare, the town is down in the bottom right there. And if you look on the very left-hand side of the screen, you'll see Claddanure West and Claddanure East. And you'll see the Bear Mountain up at the top, and then all the little strips of land coming down. And that's one of those strips that's where the Sullivan family were living and subsisting. It's also worth looking at a couple of other things on this map. There is this here, this on the Union Workhouse. I think you can just about make out. It's well outside the town. This is an institution the Sullivan family were going to become familiar with. And the person responsible for funding it was down here, Lansdowne Lodge and Shelburne Lodge. He was the Earl of Kerry, Henry Petty Fitzmaurice. Okay, and he has a role to play in the story of the Sullivans and how they moved, how they had to move from Claddanure. This is what the workhouse actually looked like. It was a machine for producing misery. The idea was to make the inmates to just give them enough to keep body and soul together. So husbands, wives were divided, boys and girls, they were all separate. They all had to make work, and they were given, it was riddled with disease. It was the most unpleasant experience you can possibly imagine. The man responsible for paying for it was the Lord Lansdowne, the Earl of Kerry, Henry Petty Fitzmaurice. And the system was that he paid poor law rates. So the poor law was the law that set this up, and it also set up a taxation system to pay for it. And it meant that small tenants had their rates paid for them by the landlord. So he was paying for this, and the amount he paid depended on the number of tenants he had. And of course, the Sullivan family were tenants of his. They were on his land. He wouldn't have known them. They were like fleas on the back of an elephant, as far as he was concerned. In fact, he had very little to do directly with the tenants, with the land. It was through his agent, his land agent, this man W.S. Trench, that he dealt with the tenants there. And this is an account of his to Lord Lansdowne. I was wholly unable to undertake the employment of these people in their present condition on reproductive works, and that if left in the workhouse, the smallest amount they could possibly cost would be £5 per head per annum, and thus that the poor rates must necessarily amount for some years to come to £15,000 per annum unless these people died or left. Okay. By 1850, the Sullivans had cracked. They had given up their small holding. It was one of the conditions of going into the workhouse that you had to give up all your property. You had to be utterly destitute. So they were in there. They were on Lord Lansdowne's books. And W.S. Trench then announced that I was prepared at Lord Lansdowne's expense to send to America everyone now in the poorhouse who was chargeable to his lordship's estate and who desired to go. leaving each to select what port in America he pleased, whether Boston, New York, New Orleans, or Quebec. That sounds quite generous. It's not. This is an investment to clear his lands of a liability. It was a good business deal for Lord Lansdowne, well implemented by his very efficient agent W.S. Trench. What it actually meant is this. In February 1851, 100 people from the Kenmare workhouse who had accepted this offer from Lord Lansdowne, including our family, John, Joanna, Margaret, Mary, and William, all set out on foot from Kenmare to walk to the nearest port where they could get a boat. So they walked, as you can see, I've outlined in blue the track of their walk. It's 2 days full walk in the middle of February in Ireland. Almost all of them barefoot, in rags, being fed gruel along their way. And finally, when they arrived in Cork, this is Cork down in the bottom left, you have to imagine it from their point of view. They had lived all their lives in Claddanure, maybe gone into Kenmare town on fair day, and Kenmare would have been the metropolis. And here they arrive in Cork, this giant city with quays bustling, and they're sent out to Cove. It was still called Cove, not Queenstown at this stage. Queen Victoria hadn't arrived yet. And from Cove, the route took them to Liverpool. They had to get the Liverpool boat from Cove. The Liverpool boat would have been a cattle boat. The cattle would have been safely stowed below deck because the cattle were more valuable than these passengers. So they would have been on deck again in February, going from Cove up the Irish Sea, a good 12, 15-hour journey in the open on the sea at the mercy of the elements. Again, you can imagine this family already traumatized by 3 years of famine, all traumatized by their experience of months of destitution in the workhouse, walking to Cove, getting onto this boat, getting into Liverpool. And when they arrive in Liverpool, this is part of what's waiting for them. Liverpool at this point in the 1840s was one of the richest cities in the Western Hemisphere. And it was rich from trade, especially from the slave trade. And it had built itself into this extraordinarily self-important, you can see from the architecture, St. George's Hall. The American consul was the novelist Nathaniel Hawthorne, and he described Liverpool as like this: the people are as numerous as maggots in cheese. You behold them disgusting and all moving about as when you raise a plank or log that has long lain on the ground and find many vivacious bugs and insects beneath it. Vivacious is interesting. But they arrived in Liverpool and the ordeal escalated again. There was an entire ecosystem of people preying on emigrants based in port cities, and especially Liverpool was the capital port city. So there were ship brokers making money from selling tickets to ships, commission agents, provision merchants, immigration agents, lodging housekeepers, runners. I'll talk a bit more about the lodging, the runners. They were all making money. They were all making money from these poor people who spoke no English, who were traumatized, who were clinging to each other for dear life. The brokers, the ship's brokers. This is an example of an ad for Tapscott's American Immigration Office. If you look down the list there, you'll see the Garrick is advertised as being 2,000 tons. 2,000, the bigger the ship, the better the facilities on board. The Garrick was actually 895 tons. So they were lying through their teeth. Who was checking them? What regulation was there? None at this point. The runners, when the cattle boat arrives from Liverpool, in Liverpool, the runner's job is to capture the emigrants and physically take them to the lodging house, will then pay them a commission. And it is physically, it's a struggle. So the runners, this is from evidence to the House of Commons. They pull them by the collar, take them by their arms, and generally speaking, the runners who are successful enough to lay hold of the boxes are pretty sure of carrying the passenger with them. So if they have any luggage, they go for the luggage, and the passengers have to follow the luggage. The lodgings. In 1850, a reporter of the London Morning Chronicle found 80 emigrants living in one small group of 4 houses, which had 3 rooms each. In 1849, cellars were occupied by 27,000 people, with as many as 30 emigrants stowed away on the stone floors of one. This is a picture from later in the 19th century of a tenement in Liverpool. You can imagine 40, 50 families, Irish, non-English speaking, crammed in here. What they have to do is organise their own passage. They have a lump of money that they've been given by Lord Lansdowne, his agent. He's got them as far as Liverpool. Their problem now. So they are terrified. Eventually, they will manage to get, the Sullivans will manage, with others in the group, will manage to get tickets and get passage, but they will have to spend months in conditions like this. They would have stayed together for dear life. The boarding then, when they had their tickets, it was again an extraordinary scramble. Sometimes there were 16 ships to clear in a day. In 1851, most of the ships would have been large American packets carrying up to 1,000 emigrants each. You can imagine 1,000 emigrants. They had to be cleared. Their health had to be checked. It was done as perfunctorily as possible. The doctors looked at their tongues, felt their pulses, and passed them through, and then they were America's problem. These are pictures of the quayside scenes. Emigrants embarking on an American packet at Waterloo Docks, Liverpool in 1850. This is exactly the kind of scene that our Sullivan family would have gone through on the quayside in Liverpool. You can imagine there was John, there was Johanna, there was Margaret, Mary, William, and little John, who at this stage, having born in 1845, was 4.5 years old. In the chaos on the quayside, he got separated from the rest of the family. And they looked and they looked and they looked and they couldn't find him. And then they're faced with the horrible choice. Do they condemn the rest of the family to the horrors? Do they give up the ticket, the only money that they have? Or do they leave John behind? And in the end, they left him behind. And I'll come back to the effect that had on the family. You can imagine the trauma they're already feeling. And this child, the youngest, the most precious of the family, has vanished. They have to go. The voyage itself was pretty hair-raising. Even on ships like this, I mean, we're not talking about coffin ships here. We're talking about supposedly respectable packet ships going back and forth across the Atlantic. This is from an account by a man called Veer Foster. He, unlike Lord Lansdowne, he paid for some emigrants to migrate, and he went with them to check that they were being looked after properly, and a remarkable man. But this is from his account. All 900 or so passengers were called forward at once to receive the water, which was pumped into their cans from barrels on deck. The serving out was twice capriciously stopped by the mates, who cursed, abused, kicked and cuffed the passengers and their tin cans, and having served about 30 people, said there would be no more water that day. Foster remonstrated with one of the mates, observing to him that such treatment was highly improper and unmanly, and that the mate would save himself a great deal of trouble and annoyance and win, instead of alienating the hearts of the passengers, if he would avoid foul language and brutal treatment. The mate replied that if Foster said another word, he would knock him down. By October the 30th, having set sail on the 25th, no food at all had been served to the passengers, although the contract tickets stated they were to be fed each day. In fact, Veer Foster did get into a physical fight with the mate later on in the voyage. But you can see, once the ship had them on board, they were theirs. How they were treated, nobody gave a hoot. It wasn't all doom and gloom. Between decks, emigrants dancing between decks. G.K. Chesterton's quote about the great gales of Ireland are the race that God made mad, for all their wars are merry and all their songs are sad. Some of the migrations were merry as well, you can see. A lot of the information I'm using in this talk comes from this book, published by Terry Coleman, called, when it was published on this side of the Atlantic, Going to America. In America, it was called Passage to America when it was published there. There's a copy of it a full copy of it available on ancestry.com if you search Terry Coleman. Arriving in New York, the same process that had happened in Liverpool, there was this great ecosystem of predators who glommed onto the passengers and physically abducted them as almost onto the lodgings in New York. And once they arrived in New York, I mean, they came with smallpox, with ship's fever, with cholera. They went into quarantine. They were viewed as vermin, infected vermin. This is one of my favorite cartoons of the period. This shows the ape-like recent immigrant Paddy having killed the golden goose, or the goose that lays the golden eggs, the Democratic Party. And he's being looked on with horror by the Catholic priest, who was onto a really good thing with the Democrats until Paddy here turned up and killed it. So there was plenty of politics around the migrants arriving. There was plenty of hostility to them. There was plenty of racism, as you can see, towards them. Well, what about the Sullivan family? Okay. The loss of the son, this little son, John, more or less dominated the family's life for the rest of their lives. Then they worked, they married, they had children, they had grandchildren. The mother of the family wrote back to every police station, every emigrants agent, every charitable organization she could think of in the UK, trying to find out what had happened to her son, John, and never found out. She made her family promise on her deathbed that they would continue the search. And they did continue the search. And this is how I know the story, is that they came to me in the 1980s asking me to continue the search. This incident, this single lost child, had rippled down generation after generation after generation. And that's at the heart of Irish America. Pain like that, rupture like that, these ripples going on generation after generation. That's it. It's, wear green hats, wear kiss me quick hats. But remember, there's something a lot more serious at the root of this. And if you're wondering whether I could find the child, no. I mean, after 150 years, a child like that swallowed up, whether he survived 24 hours, I think is probably quite doubtful. Anyway, I wish you a happy St. Patrick's Day.